Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Michael Anderson. He is a technologist who has transitioned into historian and a writer. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you very much for having me.
Welcome to the show, Michael. You are welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we'll be discussing right now. We'll talk about current global politics and the future of democracy, especially focusing on the USA. So, Michael, let's talk about your fourth book on American politics. There you talk about, a lot about Twilight of the American experience, the experiment, moral balance. Without moral balance, our republic will fail. Are you dejected just by American politics, or are you dejected with the global politics as a whole, the level of politics as a whole? Help us understand why this, why do you say that, without moral balance, our republic will fail?
Well, let me prefix my answer, AJ, by talking about the overall theme in my books, which is political morality. And I don't know if you have a concept of what that is, but I'm going to help you understand it, because in life, there are three moralities that are part of all of us. There's the private morality, the public morality, and the political morality. And private morality is what we all have put in our minds during our childhood from our parents. Part of it's genetic. If you are religious, then your religion influences your personal morality and helps shape your view of the world. So that's the private side. Now, the public side is the morality of the nation state you live in, which is different for different nation states. And the public morality is fluid and changes. So it's not fixed. The personal morality is more fixed. The public morality is not. And the public morality can change with the times, with the generations. And let me give you an example in the United States and actually around the world. So in the 60s and 70s, homosexuality was looked down upon, and it was considered immoral, unlawful, and inappropriate. So that was the public morality position then. And then in the 80s, that started to change. And the American society, I use that as an example, became more open to homosexuality and eventually accepted it as a normal behavior. So the public morality changed from one thing to another because the way the people wanted their nation to operate would be with that expanded morality. So that makes sense?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So now political morality is the morality that you have inside you that influences your view of politics. And that's what I write my books about. So the obvious example is conservatives versus liberals, because conservatives have a different view of how government should run than liberals do. And so that's the political morality. And so I started writing my books about, actually, I read a book in 2012 that influenced me to start writing about politics. And that book was called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. He's a social psychologist at NYU. And Haidt's book, he was the first to identify differences between the left and right based on morality. And Haidt identified different moral positions, different moral characteristics that separate the right from the left. For example, the left is more interested in equality than the right. The right is more interested in loyalty and authority than the left. So these are definite differences between the right and left, obviously. So to carry that point further, I wrote my first book in 2017, which was called The Progressive Gene. And the book is basically about the behavior of the left and how the left has used its personality characteristics trying to influence government, starting in the progressive age, which was the last half of the 19th century in the United States, when the Industrial Revolution began to exploit people and make them suffer. Progressives became irritated by that and fought against corruption and mistreatment of human beings in the industrial space. And many laws were changed. So there's an example of the left in action. So right now, things are very difficult here because the United States is tribal, and you probably have read a lot about it. And you know, I don't know how tribal India is in comparison, but the United States became tribal perhaps right after the millennial change in the year 2000, because everything became political. And because everything became political, then the right and the left formed tribes that got stronger, and the politicians that were in the middle, who were moderates, who controlled the communication between the left and right in order to get things done, they were gone. They were tired. So all that was left was the extremes. And so most Americans these days put themselves in one tribe or the other. The problem with that is when you have two tribes that don't want to talk to each other, how do you get things done? So that's become an obstacle to governance here. And basically the federal government is stuck in a position where it can't move forward because there's adversarial reactions to whatever it tries to do. So more political morality is really something that is involved with all societies and all human beings. It's not only the United States. So I'm sure, you know, there's political morality in India. It's different, but you know, that's the problem. And my fourth book talks about the fact that the left has taken control of the communication systems in the United States over the past 30 years. So they control the narrative in universities. Universities are very left-leaning, and the right is not allowed equal time to state their positions. Conservative professors are losing their jobs because they say the wrong thing, for example. Then, after they start influencing universities, they start influencing the traditional media. So the media in the United States, television and radio, is heavily leaned toward the left. And of course, social media is also, because the social media companies were started by Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who tend to be left-leaning themselves. So the problem is, with the communication narrative in the United States coming from the left, there is no equal time for the right, so only one position is represented. And that's the problem that I have identified and discussed in my fourth book. Now, let me add something to that, because you wonder, well, where does this come from? Why are the left and right different? Because historically, philosophers spent thousands of years trying to figure out what is the right morality. And their position was, there is some perfect morality. We just have to figure out what it is. And if we figure that out, everybody will live by it. Well, they never found the answer, of course, because there is no one morality. People have different point of views. And the source of that difference between the left and right goes back to prehistoric times, even before Homo sapiens existed, when man migrated out of Africa and then came north and encountered heterogeneous environments. They were not all like Africa. They were colder, more difficult to live in. Food supply was variable. they had to hunt for food and all that. So as an environmental adaptation, these pre-humans developed behavioral traits that supported them surviving, finding food and surviving. One group wanted to hunt for food and performed that. They desired hunting and wanted to find food supply for the population. The other group wasn't as interested in hunting. Their position was, we'd rather manage the food supply that we have. So in times where there's no food, the people who like to hunt prevailed and food was hunted for. In times where there was plentiful food, the people who were the food managers prevailed. And so that created a flexibility that allowed these pre-humans to survive, because part of the group wanted to hunt, part of the group wanted to manage the food supply. The people that wanted to hunt were the liberals, because they like new things and they want change and all that. The people who wanted to manage the food supply were the conservatives, because they like the status quo. So that those personality characteristics and traits set up the behaviors of the right and left that we see today, because that's in all of us.
Right, Michael. To understand it better, talking of democracy, America is the largest democracy, the biggest democracy of the world. And I am from India, the largest democracy of the world. Here we have got many parties, and though there are some deficiencies everywhere in the system, even in the US it is India, but we still have a thriving democracy, and this example is being taken off. Yeah. You are from the world's, biggest democracy, and there is a bit of, a lot of people are questioning about exactly the way all this politics is going on. I want to understand, everywhere when democracy is talked about, they talk about of the people, by the people, for the people. What has happened to that in the US? Is it still happening when we talk of democracy, or is it about some narrative by one section or the other? Who is controlling the narrative? Is it the people, or is it about the people, or is it about a bunch of people who are trying to control? So who is it all about, and who are the people who are trying to run the affairs of US? And when we talk of US, the world is so connected with the US in so many ways, either in economy, in trade, in terms of American influence into so many spheres of, either it's Middle East, either it's Europe, or anywhere else in the world. I want to understand you, because you talk about the American experiment, you talk about the moral balance, you talk about, political morality. I'm quite wanting to understand for the audience then, is America still the place where people can actually take its example as something of an as an icon?
Well, to answer your question, we have to go back in time. Okay, so originally human beings lived in small bands or tribes, 50 to 150 people. That's before agriculture. And when agriculture was discovered and food supply could be controlled, then people could live in larger groups, obviously. So they could live in villages and cities and grow in very dense populations. When the number of people in a community got large enough, that community needed a government, because you have to have a government to control like the market and the food supply and to keep the peace, for example. So governments were absolutely necessary. Now, in the beginning and for all time, the most influential people in any society are the wealthy. And in the ancient period, wealthy people owned land. And if you owned land, that land could produce profits and make you wealthy. So the wealthy had all the power. And so, one of the original political systems was an aristocracy where the government is run by rich people. The Roman Republic was originally run by the patricians, the wealthy class, and the plebeians had no rights. And over time, they fought for rights and were finally granted those rights. But the wealthy have always had the power and the influence in any government system, and it exists today. India has a power elite, and the United States has a power elite, and those are intellectuals, wealthy people, old money and new money that wield power based on their wealth, and that doesn't change. So it's the same everywhere. Now, in the United States, we like to think that the people share that power, but in a certain sense, the sharing is very limited because we can vote for president, but there's so much propaganda that we're given regarding the candidates. You have to try and figure out where the truth is and make your own decision based on what you're hearing. And it's not all accurate. So the public has to be very well informed and educated about who they're going to vote for. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen. About 60% of Americans vote, so there's 40% that don't. And of those 40%, a large number are influenced by others that tell them how to vote. For example, if you're in an organization, let's say you're in a union, for example, the union's going to have a position about the candidates, and it's going to tell you who to vote for. So you're not really voting for yourself, you're voting for the union. So the issue with that is democracy depends on the independent voice of the individual. So if I read about the candidates and look at their positions on the issues and then make a logical decision which one supports what I believe in and votes that way, that's how democracy is supposed to work. But it doesn't really, in the end, work that way.
Right. So if it does not work that way, does it mean that the life of a democracy or the concept of democracy in that system is not very long? How do you look at it? And you talk about moral balance. Without moral balance, our republic will fail. What is this moral balance? And do you see a future where people will actually be a participant in that power sharing, when it will be a government by the people, of the people, and for the people?
Well, there's no question that democracies are the best form of government. You probably heard many times a statement, I think Winston Churchill made it: democracy is the worst form of government ever conceived, but it's better than all the others. Because democracies provide rights for people. And that really has nothing to do with the power side of it. If I can live my own life and seek my own profession and get a job and have the freedom to do what I like, that's what democracies are about. Because in authoritarian societies, you don't have those rights. You don't have the freedom of speech. If you say something the government doesn't like, you can be put in jail. So the basic structure of democracy is it provides all those freedoms, like in the American Bill of Rights, and I'm sure in the Indian Constitution, set the stage for people to live successful lives. If you want to work hard, you can get ahead. Basically, it's under your control. Now, where democracies are going in the future, it's hard to say. They may morph into something else. I'm not sure. There's never been a model that has provided more freedom for people than a democracy. So it's hard to imagine that there's anything better. I guess the only scary part would be if you imagine that we lose our rights, that somehow democracies turn into authoritarian governments. Now, in the United States, the radical left wants to change the United States into a socialist state. because they believe that capitalism is immoral. And so their aim is to get rid of capitalism and let all the means of production be owned by the government. And so the government would control everything. But if that happened, then we would lose our rights, because you can't have an authoritarian centralized government with rights to the people. So that's the issue there.
Right, right. You raised this question: is America a democracy? What answer have you found for this? Do
Well,
you really
we
believe
are,
that?
because we meet the basic requirements of a democracy, of an advanced democracy. We have freedom of speech, we have freedom of organization. Anybody can run for election. Anybody of a certain age can vote. The elections are pretty much fair. There's very little coercion to try to make people vote a certain way. There is some corruption, but it's minor. People trust the fact that elections are valid, and that people try to influence the direction of the government in terms of new laws. And that's where this political morality comes in, because the left and right always are trying to influence government in a certain direction. It isn't the same direction, but they both have a idea of what direction it should go in.
Absolutely, absolutely. Then why do you feel that this American experiment, uh, 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 because of this, without moral balance, the republic will fail? Is democracy so weak that that any sort of moral balance or whatever problem it has, this problem will impact democracy or the republic in such a strong way as if it will fail?
Well,
I find these two things a bit, moving in two different directions. Help us
right.
understand this in the backdrop of the book that you have written.
Yeah, sure. But when I'm talking about our Republic of Fall, I'm not talking about democracy. I'm talking about the problems between left and right. And because the left controls the communication narrative systems in our state, the right doesn't have any voice. And the right needs to have a voice, because the country moves forward by a consensus between the right and left on what should be done. And if the Congress could reach a consensus, then laws could be passed for the benefit of all. But right now, neither party is willing to mediate with the other party for the good of the country, because they're in a tribal position. So the society is tribal, which makes the political system tribal. Now, in terms of the elections, I mean, basically 30% of the country, or 40%, is liberal and 40% is conservative. So the political positions are split, the political morality. So that means that Republicans can still elect officials, but in the cultural space, the cultural narrative, and all the communication space, all that power is held by the left. So the idea of the book is the American society needs to come into a better balance, generated by a consensus between right and left on how to move the country forward. Otherwise, it will stagnate.
Right, right. You talk about a successful democracy must have consensus on government action. I thought the opposition normally, challenges whatever action the government takes, so that that particular law, rule, or whatever it is refined further. What
Yes.
happens to that if if there are yes men to everything? How does then that work? Where does consensus go? Where does the right kind of opposition and bringing in new ideas go?
Well, as I said, the way the American culture operates with its tribalism is different than the government, because the conservatives and liberals are pretty evenly split. The government can change hands. Donald Trump got elected, then Joe Biden got elected, and Donald Trump could be elected again, and that changes the narrative. Then that changes the influence from one side to another. And I think I answered your question. Maybe I didn't.
Yes, yes. Indeed. Indeed, Michael. So, how is the response to this book, especially in the US?
Well, it just came out September 28th, so it's only been out a month. The response has been good so far. I've talked to some of my readers, and they like it and appreciate it. So everything's good so far.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot of people, democracy is a very old word, but a lot of new things, are there are new questions about different forms of government. Even in democracy, people have many questions to ask. Though, as you said, it is still one of the best form of government that one can think of. In that sense, so there will be a lot of people who would want to understand things more from your perspective. So, what is the best way they can connect with you? What is the best way they can get hold of this book if someone from India wants this book? And that's all.
Well,
How can they learn more from you? And are you coming on with some new book?
yeah, I have a fifth book that I'm writing right now, and you'd be interested in the title, which is America's Counterfeit Democracy, where I talk. That's right up your alley.
Right.
My books are all available on Amazon, for one thing, and I have an author website, very simple, mikeandersonsbooks.com. So if you go there, you can see all my books, and I have a blog that I write about political issues there, and that's where you can find me.
Absolutely, absolutely. As the title suggests, that raises many more questions, and I would look forward to talk again on the new book that you are writing on. As of now, you have answered some very difficult questions, but in the right way, left us all a bit more, aware on and learned in the word called democracy and the political system in the US. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.